Hello everybody, I am Jarrett Ross, the Genie Vlogger, and welcome back to another professional Genealogist Reacts. On today's video, I will be reacting to Are We Korean and German? DNA Test by YB Chang. Not familiar with this channel at all, took a look into it, and it looks like it's a couple, the guy being German, the girl being Korean. So I'm guessing they're going to take a DNA test. So hopefully we'll get to see both of their results, and maybe they'll go into matches too. So that's all I'm going to say for now. But before we do jump into the video, please be sure to give this a like. That really does help me out. Also, be sure to subscribe and click that bell for notifications on future videos. But with all that fun stuff said, let's jump into the video.
Hey guys, it's YB.
And Herbert.
Wow, that was a real Herbert.
That was a real one today.
That was a real one. We thought we might as well do our own DNA test because who knows? Who knows what we really are? Are we really Korean and German?
Are we human?
Are we human? Are we something else? I think it's more likely that you have more stuff than I do because I'm assuming I just come out full Asian, full Korean. Do you identify as a German?
I do identify as German, yes.
I feel like since our whole channel is based on our identity, like I'm doing Korean stuff, you're doing German stuff, I feel like it'd be interesting to see if we really are what we think we are. So we did a 23andMe test and it took about 3 weeks. It was pretty easy. We just had to like spit into it and send it out, and now it's here. Okay, so we're gonna do Herbert's first because I feel like that's gonna be more exciting. Are you ready? Don't look yet.
I'm ready.
Now, I wonder how they're going to react because, as we've seen on this channel so many times, anyone with German ancestry, Northwestern European ancestry, or honestly any sort of European ancestry, you're usually going to get mixes of stuff in there that you're not going to expect just because of how the DNA is read and the complications of DNA and migrations throughout Europe. So I won't be surprised, especially based on the intro to the video where he was on the phone with his mom, but it's probably going to have readings that he's going to be like, what? Not German? And I don't remember how 23andMe has it, but a lot of these companies won't even have German on its own. It will often be French and German or Germanic Empire, things like that.
First, we're going to look at the general. So you're 100% European.
Who would have known that?
Who would have known? Okay, 99.8% European.
Okay, 50% Eastern European and to Poland. So they actually have multiple regions they're getting in their communities. Although I'm not sure if they call it communities here on 23andMe, but whenever you're getting readings and then it's giving you very specific places connected to that, what it's saying is we found this reading, and even more, we found you have a lot of genetic matches that are placing their ancestry in this area. So that probably means if it's 50% Eastern European and then everything else is kind of a little different, it's probably Eastern Europeans coming from one parent, and then the Northwestern European or his German is coming from another parent. So that makes a lot of sense when you think about where's Poland and Germany right next to each other. Well, you know, the borders have changed a lot, things have changed a lot, and so even though he may think he's German, and I guess we'll find out his reaction in a second, but even though he thinks he's German, it still might be that his parent, you know, let's say it's his dad, well, maybe his dad, even though his dad for generations, their family lived in the same place and they've considered themselves German, genetically they look more like they're Polish because of their family ancestry, but you wouldn't know culturally. Of course, there's a possibility that this is also a mix from both parents and both of his parents have sort of an Eastern European thing, but all right, let's see what he says.
49.5% Eastern European. Almost half is Eastern European. So the first thing that comes up is Poland, not German.
Okay.
So right now it says 49.5% Eastern European, Poland mostly. Then 43.5% Northwestern European. And from there is the French and German.
Okay.
Right? So you're less German and more Polish. So you've been lying to me this whole
I
time.
know. I'm sorry.
So those are your main compositions, Eastern European and Northwestern European. Then there is 2.4% Southern European and you're Italian.
So that would be the equivalent of about a second great-grandparent or third great-grandparent. I know I do this in almost every video, but you expect 25% from your grandparents, 12.5% from your great-grandparents, 6.25% from your great-great-grandparents, and then 3.1 whatever percent from your third great-grandparents. So technically, it could also be a fourth great-grandparent if he ended up just getting a lot of it randomly. So like a second or fourth great-grandparent distance. So if he doesn't really know his family tree that well, if he looks up one side, probably the German side, up, third, fourth great-grandparent, he'll probably find someone who's Italian. Now, assuming that he's about the same age as me, a third great-grandparent for him would have been born in the first quarter of the 19th century, so about 1825 or so. So if he's looking at his ancestry and he's trying to find if he truly has an Italian ancestor, if all of it's coming from one ancestor, it's going to be an ancestor born the beginning of the 19th century. And since we do have that range of about a second great-grandparent to a fourth great-grandparent, fourth great-grandparent's going to be born right around the turn of that century, so late 1700s, early 1800s, and a second great-grandparent's going to be born about mid-19th century. So in a sense, you can say that the range would be maybe like an ancestor, full Italian ancestry who was born somewhere between 1775 and 1850. I would probably say that 75-year stretch, that'd probably be the likelihood. But let's continue.
And broadly European, 4.4%. Okay, so now let's look at the details. That's the detailed breakdown. So the Eastern European, it consists of Poland all the way to Ukraine, but it says likely matches Poland only, nothing else.
Well,
So on 23andMe, when you go and look at the genetic relatives tab, I forgot exactly what they call it, and you look at your matches and you look for people where they're listing ancestry in Poland, you're going to probably find a lot, and that's why it's saying that it's a likely match.
Poland is right next to Germany. Does make sense.
It does make sense. Now, the German part of it is the French and German category, 42.2%, and the likely match is Germany. So there you go.
All right.
Almost German. 0% British and Irish, 0% Finnish, 0% Scandinavian. And then there you go, the 2.4% Italian. So they've detected the Italian DNA in your ancestral breakdown. They have not identified more specific locations.
I think I have to make some calls.
I guess I'm mostly surprised of the Polish thing, other than German. I thought it'd be mostly German.
Change my citizenship. I don't know. I have to do that.
I've never met people from Poland actually either.
I'm also curious what region of Poland it is. Podkarpacki. So let's see what area. Oh, wow. So yeah, so it's actually, what I was thinking was maybe if it's on the side of Poland that's next to Germany, that, okay, it definitely makes sense because then it's an area where the border's jumping back and forth, but it's one of the areas that's right on the border with Ukraine. I wonder if he really does have ancestry from there. And if so, especially that, very specific area, which doesn't seem to have any major cities, at least any that I've familiar with, because Poland does have a lot of big cities: Krakow, Lodz, Warsaw, Poznan. There's a lot of big cities. So what can basically be done is as he starts looking further into his ancestry, he can see, does he have any genetic matches where it's even more specific than this region, and it's a specific town or city in this region, and well, are there any people that he's matching where they have known migrations from this area to Germany, and then maybe he also descends from that same migration. So maybe there was a big community of people from Poland that migrated sometime in the 19th century out to Germany, and then they created a community, and thus everyone who descends from that community is also going to look mostly Polish, and thus half Polish. But whenever you do find areas specifically being listed like this for your DNA results, it's a pretty good idea to pull it up on Google Maps or Google Earth and see where is it located, and especially does it make more sense seeing where it's located. So here, not quite as much because we're looking at the eastern side of Poland. So there's a whole lot of complicated possibilities going on here.
Go to my genetic composition.
She cut off the reading.
100% Asian.
Okay, 96.5% Japanese and Korean, and then they're associating it all with Korea, and they have Seoul listed.
So I am 99.5% East Asian and Indigenous American. So the majority.
They say East Asian and Indigenous American because they are genetically connected. It's kind of funny. In my Native American DNA video, I was really intrigued by the fact that the tribes further north seem to have much more Asian readings. And a lot of people seem to take it as me not understanding that Asian and Indigenous American have the connection through the Bering Strait. There were multiple migrations and, that whole thing. Well, yeah, I did know that was a thing. And that is why they say it like this. It's been, anyone who's been doing genetic genealogy, especially since when I started in 2013 with genetic genealogy, that was when I first tested, it was very, very apparent when you would do it and you would look at the results, it was always lumping Indigenous American with Asian. And it's just because they share so much DNA signatures that it can be hard to tell them apart. And also with that, you get a lot of people where they do have Asian ancestry or Indigenous American ancestry, and they get readings from the other side. So someone with Asian ancestry might get small percentages of Native American, doesn't necessarily mean they actually have it. And at the same time, someone with a Native American ancestry may take a DNA test and get readings in Asia, but that also doesn't necessarily mean that you also have, recent Asian ancestry. Remember, these tests really only show you the past 300 to 500 years, but complications with DNA and migrations can make it so things that, happened 1,000 years ago are affecting your DNA even in small ways. Let's continue.
Majority, 96.5% is Korean.
Interesting. For her Chinese, I just noticed she has it. They have a connection to Guangdong, which I believe is in the southern part of China. Is that right? Because that's where that's like the Cantonese. Yeah. Is that if I remember correctly, this is one of the areas that Cantonese is common in. But yeah, so southern part of China. But that makes sense, just connected to where Korea is. It's not too far, but not super close either. But yeah, I mean that's kind of interesting. I wonder if that's got to be a really super populated province with Hong Kong in there, Shenzhen, Guangzhou. All right, let's continue.
Well, they lumped Japanese and Korean together, but specifically it says Korean. I have 2% of Chinese and Southeast Asian. So the amount that you're Italian, I'm Chinese. I have 1% Northern Asian. I guess that's like the...
Which also means the same things of what I was saying about his Italian ancestor. She wanted to try to find out about her Chinese ancestor. She'll be looking at, about second to fourth great grandparent. Hers is, 2%, so a couple point percentages less than his. So leaning a little bit more towards the further part. But of course, recombination's random. So it could be, could be a second great grandparent. And she just inherited such a small chunk of it.
Indigenous part of Manchurian and Mongolian. They did conquer Asia back in the day, so I'm assuming it's like the same kind of thing. Hey, I have 0.1% unassigned.
That means?
I'm an alien.
Oh.
0.1% alien. No one knows.
Careful, Louis.
Okay, now let's look at the scientific details. 96.5% South Korea, no North Korean detected in me. I mean, that would have been kind of interesting, I guess. But I guess they could.
That makes me wonder. I didn't realize they had that breakdown before of South Korean and North Korean. But how genetically similar are South Koreans to North Koreans? Because my understanding was the split is much more recent. And I would think that the North Koreans and South Koreans are extremely similar genetically, but if they're confident enough to be able to make that a separated group. Now that I'm saying that and I'm thinking about what I was just looking at, that's the thing they base on genetic matches. So, but still kind of an interesting thing. I'm sure you could tell quite well by genetic matches if someone comes from recent South Korean or recent North Korean ancestry.
Could detect if you're also North Korean. That's cool. 0% Japanese, just South Korean for me. Then I have 2% of mainland China, no Taiwanese, just mainland China. And I'm assuming that's also from the back in the days when China basically controlled most of Asia, probably Chinese 0. Then yeah, I have 1% of Manchurian Mongolian, then 0.1% unassigned, which means sometimes they're unable to match a region of your DNA to a specific population with confidence.
Yeah, with you can pretty much say you're Korean.
Yeah. How exciting.
You are Korean.
I am Korean. I'm pretty sure Eugene took a DNA test and he was actually mostly like Japanese, Chinese, and other stuff.
You are 19.9% Japanese.
19.9.
19.9.
My parents would be furious.
This was my first reaction ever, was the Try Guys reaction.
You are 13.1% Chinese.
So I thought maybe I would have more mix in me within the Asian continent, but it looks like I'm just Korean. I guess nothing really interesting about me.
I mean, she does have those small percentages of Chinese, and she did have an extremely, extremely small percentage of, I forgot what it was. She didn't even mention it, though.
I'm basically 96.5% Korean. Herbert is
A mix.
half Polish, half German. But mostly still German and Polish.
Based on the Polish reading, I mean, I really would imagine one of his parents is fully Polish. And actually, being that they did it on 23andMe, I hope that they show this, but I doubt it because there's only a minute left in their video. 23andMe allows you to look at your chromosome browser and see where all your DNA is landing in your chromosome. You could see where that Italian is in his DNA. But you can also use that to get an idea of, is one parent more one thing than the other, or are you getting all of one thing from one parent, not the other? And so if he looks at that and he sees on each single chromosome, it'll be, 2 on each chromosome because you get a pair of chromosomes. So one from your mom, one from your dad. When you look at each pair, you can see if one line on each time only has Poland and the other one has none, then you're probably looking at that DNA coming just from one parent. So there are ways that he could figure it out, especially just getting his parents to DNA test and then phasing the results, and he should be able to see, are they also getting German and Poland? Are they getting a similar mix? Or is one parent almost all German and the other parent's almost all Polish?
Ask them a few questions, yes.
Guten Morgen. Das Video diesmal war ein DNA-Test. Und da kam raus, dass ich mehr als die Hälfte polischer Abstammung bin. 48% Polen, ich glaube 46% Deutschland oder sowas.
His father is from Breslau, so it's probably all from his dad.
Aus Breslau?
All right, let's look. And is that in the same area that we saw before? No, not quite, because we were looking over here in the southeastern region. So that's very interesting, if that's where his father came from. There is also that question, their family from Germany and Poland, so how did World War II affect them and what information was lost, especially from the Polish side, because we all know what happened to Poland in the war. And I imagine there was a lot lost for a lot of people to be able to know their Polish ancestry.
Okay.
Okay, well, that was our DNA composition that we took. Thank you guys for watching, and we will see you next time. Bye!
All right, well, that was a decent video. As always, I wish they kind of went into genetic matches or things like that more. They went through things. They seemed to, have a good understanding as soon as, he mentioned the Polish. He'd said, well, they're right next to each other, and that is a real good way of thinking of these DNA tests. You don't want to think of it as, hard borders in terms of the definitions. I mean, if you look at maps going back every 10 years in Europe, the lines will change constantly, and especially once you get back to like the 18th century, 19th century, we're dealing with like the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, you're dealing with the Austro-Hungarian Empire, you're dealing with Germanic Europe, you're dealing with the Ottoman Empire, you're dealing with all of these different forces having their little parts and sways in all of these areas close by, migrations. It does complicate things a bit. But that phone call that he had there with his parents, and based on what he's saying with his dad, sounds like that Polish is coming from his dad's side. I still would be curious if both of his parents tested, would they get a similar reading as him of almost 50-50, or will it be that one parent's almost all German and then the other parent's almost all Polish. I think the most interesting thing for me for them to be able to look into genealogically would be that Italian and the Chinese. So for him, trying to see where is that Italian coming from, and is it coming from one recent ancestor? And then for her, is she really having this Chinese ancestry, or is it just, a big mix of a bunch of distant ancestors with Chinese, and that she really is mostly Korean? Or was there some sort of migration of one of her ancestors from China to Korea? So genealogically speaking, for both of them, these DNA tests are giving us hints of things that we could look into if we wanted to build out their family tree. And since I'm a genealogist, that's always my goal with these DNA tests, and I imagine a goal for many of my audience. And the last thing is that I'd be interested to see what her results would be if she took one of the Asian-based DNA tests. We talk about these a good amount on the channel whenever Asian DNA comes up, because with the tests that most people take in the US and in the UK and a lot of Europe, you're looking at Ancestry, 23andMe, MyHeritage, and Family Tree DNA, but all of them don't have the most nuanced breakdowns for Asian. I mean, I imagine many of them are a lot better now, but there are Asian-based companies like WeGene and 23 and I forgot a few. There's a good amount. There's like 4 or 5 of them out there. Those give a more nuanced breakdown for the Asian ancestry, but they won't give you a nuanced breakdown for European or anything like that. So that'd be interesting to see what kind of a result she would get for that. And if you'd like to see more about those Asian DNA tests, be sure to check out this reaction I did to a group that took those tests. And if you enjoyed this video, please be sure to give it a like. That really does help me out. Also, be sure to click right about here to subscribe. It is completely free to do so. You can also follow me on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram @GenieVlogger. I'm the Genie Vlogger. See you in my next video.